Monday Night Raw starts off with a Rhea Ripley promo. She comes out, she mentions Dominic Mysterio, and she started off guns blazing, ends up saying that Dominic was never deep enough. Then Liv Morgan, well, she ends up alluding to Liv Morgan, ends up saying that Liv Morgan can't run forever. Then Liv and Dom end up coming out on the microphone. They in the crowd. Dominic ends up revealing his intentions of why he ended up leaving, betraying Rhea Ripley. He ends up saying that he is a man, that he deserves to be treated like one, and that you always treated me like trash. You tried to change me, and that it was embarrassing being around you, constantly bossing me around, having to call you mommy all the time. And now with Liv, he doesn't have to do that. She ends up saying that Liv Morgan allows me to be me, my true self, and that she ended up doing the one thing that you couldn't do for me, which is beat my father. Rhea Ripley ends up responding, ends up saying that, look, the man that you have become is one of my biggest accomplishments, but when it comes to your father, I wanted you to defeat him on your own, so there's no excuses to see who's the better man. Liv Morgan ends up responding, ends up saying that Dom is hers, all the Judgment Day is hers, everything that she once had is hers, the World Heavyweight Championship. Then Rhea Ripley ends up responding, ends up saying that yes, you took majority of the things that were mine, but majority of the things that you took from me was just weaklings. Then she ends up saying that there was nothing. Then Rhea Ripley ends up going on about there's nothing that'll be able to stop her. Then Rhea Ripley ended up saying something. I couldn't really understood what she really said, but she was alluding to something. Then the crowd was a little bit confused, and then Damian Priest ends up coming from behind Rhea and behind Dominic and Liv Morgan. Then they end up turning around, and then Dominic and Damian starts brawling. They start fighting. Liv tries to stop Damian, but she can't. They end up fighting in the crowd. He tries to go. Then they get to the ring. Tries to go for a choke slam, but Carlito ends up making a save, which leads to Damian versus Carlito. Damian ends up picking up the easy victory. Judgment Day after the match, of course, ends up attacking Damian Priest. They end up getting the numbers advantage, but then Rhea Ripley comes out and they all end up running away. Then JD Madonna is the only one left in the ring. They end up rehashing what they did last week. Damian Priest ends up hitting the choke slam on JD Madonna. Then Rhea Ripley and Damian Priest ends up hugging. But while they're hugging, Dominic Mysterio goes up the top rope and tries to go off the top rope and tries to attack them both. But Damian ends up catching him while he's hugging Rhea Ripley, which I thought was very dope. He has him in the choke slam position. Then he is up tossing Dominic to Rhea Ripley. Rhea Ripley is about to hit the riptide, but she's too close to the ropes, which allows Liv Morgan to end up making a save, and that's the end of the segment here. I love what they're doing here. This has been really good. I love what they've been doing with this new Judgment Day. Now, some fans have been complaining that the new Judgment Day looks weak. I don't understand why that's a complaint, because that was always the plan. Like, I don't know what you guys was expecting. Like, the new Judgment Day was always going to lose to Damian and Rhea Ripley. I don't understand why people are complaining about this. And plus, Finn Balor, Dominic, JD, they always look weak. I don't understand why this is new to people. Like, they have always looked incompetent during their whole entire time in the Judgment Day. Like, go back and watch when Rhea Ripley was champion. They could not do anything without Rhea Ripley. Like, they have always looked this way. So them getting destroyed by Rhea and Priest isn't anything new. Like, I don't know why fans are so shocked by this. Like it's I sometimes question, do people even watch the product? It's like Finn Balor, JD, all of them have always been incompetent. They always been like that. I don't understand why all of a sudden now, since they're facing Rhea and Dom, they expect them to be this dominant faction. It's like they never was that. The only dominant people in the group was always Rhea Ripley and Damian Priest. That was it. Everyone else was always incompetent. So I don't know why fans are complaining about that. It's like they have always been like that. Now next, get a quick segment with Ivy Nile and Maxine Dupri. It looks like my prediction was right, but it wasn't that hard to really predict that this was going to be a storyline, because this leads up to something later in the show. Ivy Nile tries to recruit Maxine Dupri to join the new faction of American Made, but Maxine is too loyal to Alpha Academy. She says she can't abandon her family, and Maxine ends up, playing it off like she accepts it, but I knew later in the show she was going to betray Maxine Dupri. Next, we end up getting a quick segment with Xavier Woods, Kofi Kingston, Odyssey Jones. Kofi ends up mentioning how Odyssey has a match and how they're going to be there on the sidelines, supporting him. Then they're still teasing, the heel turn of Xavier Woods. Xavier Woods is not really liking Kofi having Odyssey Jones around. This leads to a match with Odyssey Jones where he basically faces a jobber. He ends up swashing him. Then this leads to Karrion Kross. The final testament ends up coming out. Karrion Kross gets on the microphone. He ends up saying that Kofi, it's very obvious what he's trying to do, that he's trying to replace Big E and with Odyssey Jones, and he's also trying to replace Xavier Woods. Xavier Woods gets on the microphone. He ends up saying that whatever he's trying to do, it's not going to work. These mind games that Karrion Kross is trying to play to put him and Kofi against each other is not going to work. So let's just settle this and let's have a tag match next week. Kofi ends up interrupting. Xavier Woods ends up saying that, how about we have a 6-man tag? Because whoever the other member of the tag team that's not in the match is just going to interfere anyway, which he had a good point, but Xavier Woods didn't like that idea, mainly because he doesn't want to team with Odyssey Jones. They're playing the story of, Kofi is trying to replace Big E, so Xavier's not liking that, which I am liking that story, and Karrion Kross ends up agreeing. So next week, we could potentially see a Xavier Woods heel turn, maybe, don't know, but we could see a heel turn eventually, because Xavier Woods is still having issues with Kofi bringing in Odyssey Jones. Now next, we get Alpha Academy versus American Made. This was a really good match, really solid match. Alpha Academy was getting the upper hand, but then during the match, towards the end of the match, Ivy Nile ends up attacking Maxine Dupri, which leads to a distraction of Otis. Ivy Nile ended up putting Maxine Dupri in like some type of chokehold, which led to Brutus Creed, I think, ended up getting a roll-up pin, picking up the victory. I love what they're doing here. I love that they put Ivy Nile in the group, because I'm like, it makes no sense for Ivy Nile not to be in the group. I think this is great. Hopefully, they could build up on this faction. I'm very interested to see how they build up on this faction, because if they're still feuding with the Wyatt Six, then I don't know how this is going to play out. But I like this group. I like the potential of this group. This group has a lot of potential if booked correctly. Now next, we get Pete Dunne. He's getting interviewed. The reporter is asking about Sheamus, asking about his experience with Sheamus and all that. Pete Dunne ends up saying that Sheamus has never elevated them, that he held him back, and that it was always about Sheamus. It was just the Sheamus show. And he ends up saying that if he really had us under his wing, then where is Ridge Holland at? Then Jackie ends up mentioning the name the name he used to have, which was Butch. Pete gets a little frustrated, ends up saying that he never wants to hear that name ever again. I love what they're doing here. I love that they're giving him more of a speaking role, giving more of his personality. This is what more of what we need to really get him over, to really get into this feud. Hopefully we get more one-on-one segments, like actual promos between him and Sheamus. I think that could really get the crowd going into this feud. But right so far, I like what they're doing with Pete Dunne. Now, we get Damage Control versus Pure Fusion Collective, which is a bad name. I don't know who came up with that name, but whoever came up with that name needs to get fired. That name is terrible. Change it immediately. I don't know what is up with that. That name is just bad. Like, no, that is just bad. Unholy Union was on outside watching the match. They ended up interfering in the match, which led to a disqualification, and they ended up taking out both tag teams. They took out Damage Control and they took out Pure Fusion Collective. This is going to lead to a triple threat tag team match between all three for the WWE tag team titles. I don't know how that match is going to play out. I'm assuming Unholy Union will retain for the most part, because Unholy Union are still beefing with Jade and Bianca, and I'm assuming Jade and Bianca will have another match against them for the tag title. So I'm going to assume Unholy Union will retain. Probably Blair Davenport is probably going to interfere in the match to help them retain, most likely. Now next, we get Randy Orton and Gunther. They have a promo. Gunther ends up saying that Randy had unlimited potential, but he wasted the potential. He says Randy shouldn't be considered one of the greatest. He should be considered the greatest. Then he ends up saying that this is a new era, and that this new era has no room for wrestlers who waste their potential. Then Randy ends up cutting a very motivational promo. He ends up listing all of his accomplishments. He lists off that he made mistakes, but he also owns up to those mistakes, and that he, even with all those flaws that he had, that he is still considered one of the greatest of all time. Then he ends up mentioning how Randy Orton himself ends up mentioning how unpredictable he is, and that's going to play a factor into Bash. Then Gunther ends up responding back. He ends up saying that Randy isn't that unpredictable. He's actually very predictable. Then he starts listing off predictions. He ends up listing off that he's going to win at Bash. Then the second prediction he listed was that Randy would never win another world title. And he says that he's very confident in this because he always screws up when it matters most. Then he starts mentioning his family. He says that his grandfather was a screw-up, his father was a screw-up, and that Randy Orton is the biggest screw-up of them all. It looks like they're about to brawl, but then Drew McIntyre ends up coming out. Drew McIntyre walks down the ring. It looks like he's about to say something, but then Gunther ends up turning around. It looks like he was about to turn his attention towards Drew. Randy ends up taking advantage, ends up, turning Gunther towards him, and ends up hitting him with an RKO out of nowhere. Then Drew tries to get in the ring, but then CM Punk ends up attacking Drew. They go back and forth. They brawl. Drew looked like he was about to get the upper hand. He ends up taking out his belt, tries to whip CM Punk, but CM Punk ends up taking the advantage, ends up start whipping Drew McIntyre, and they end up brawl, and that's the end of the segment there. This was solid. I'm really invested in this Gunther/Randy feud. We know who's going to win the feud, but this feud has gotten a lot better, and I love what they did with Drew and and CM Punk building up that feud as well. Very interested to see what's the plans for them, because especially with Seth Rollins being out, I don't know how they will, stretch this out a bit. Seth Rollins probably will come back sooner than later, but it's very interesting to see how they're going to drag this feud out though. Now next, get a quick segment. Sheamus was talking to Sheamus was talking to Ludwig. In the middle of it, Pete Dunne ends up attacking Sheamus. I don't know what he had. He had some type of cane or something. He ends up attacking him. He ends up smashing Sheamus' hand. I love what they're doing here. They do need to eventually have a match. They can't drag this on it forever. They do need to eventually have a match, and I do think they should have at least one promo segment to really build up this feud. I like what they're doing here. I like Sheamus. I like Pete Dunne. I like what they're doing here. I like the slow build up, but eventually they will need to have a match, but I'm very interested to see how this can play out. Hopefully Pete Dunne does win this feud, but I feel like Sheamus is just going to win the feud, which I kind of feel like is pointless. As much as I like Sheamus should not be winning this feud, mainly because this does nothing for Sheamus. If you're going to have Sheamus win feuds, he needs to win feuds against other main event talent, not against mid-carders like Pete Dunne. That's just my opinion. Now next, get The Miz versus Bronson Reed. Bronson Reed picks up an easy victory. But after the match, Bronson Reed does what he did last week to Seth Rollins. He goes on the top rope, hits a tsunami on The Miz. He was finna go for it again, but R-Truth gets involved. So instead of hitting it on The Miz, he ends up hitting it on R-Truth. He hits R-Truth with like 7 tsunamis. He did the same thing he did to Seth Rollins. He did it over and over and over and over again. I am loving what they're doing with Bronson Reed. He's been booked great. The only problem I have is that I feel like the moment Seth Rollins comes back, they're going to screw it up. Because I feel like what they're going to do is book Bronson Reed strong, but the moment he faces a upper level talent that is basically above his popularity, they're going to eventually have him lose with relative ease. And I hope that doesn't happen, because if you really want to push Bronson Reed as this guy, you need to have him win matches against credible people. Because one of the main issues they do is that they push Bronson Reed, but the moment he faces someone like a Sheamus, he lose. You got to have him win credible matches. If you have him lose against credible opponents, this means nothing. I love what they're doing here. I love the booking you're doing with Bronson Reed. I'm a big Bronson Reed fan, but you got to have him win against credible opponents. Once you have him win against credible opponents, the crowd will get more behind him. But until then, he's getting over with the crowd slowly. He is getting over with the crowd. The crowd is loving him doing the tsunami splash, but got to have him win against credible opponents. But I love what they're doing so far. Now we get to the main event. Sami Zayn versus Braun Breaker. 2 out of 3 falls. 2 out of 3 falls match. This was a really good match. Sami ends up picking up the first fall with a hula kick. And then the second fall ends up going to Braun Breaker. He ends up hitting 2 spears. Then Braun Breaker ends up getting the last fall. He ends up hitting a spear midair. Sami going for a top rope dive. He ends up spearing him midair. Braun Breaker retains his Intercontinental Championship, which was as expected. This was overall a good, solid show. I love everything they did here. They progressed some stories. I love what they're doing here. Bash and Berlin is looking like a very good pay-per-view. And it is confirmed that Rhea Ripley and Damian will be facing Dominic and Liv. So that should be very interesting. I could see Damian and Rhea winning, but if they really want to prolong this feud, most likely they're going to have Liv and Dominic win by interference. Liv and Dominic are not winning cleanly. They're going to win by interference. But this was overall a good show. This was a really good show. You guys let me know your opinions down below. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. But yeah, that's it.